Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the Complex Trauma Training Center. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Are you a licensed mental health professional looking to deepen your clinical expertise in healing complex trauma? We are thrilled to announce our Summer 2025 NARM Therapist Training offering, designed to equip you with the transformative power of the neuroaffective relational model. The summer online cohort for the NARM Therapist Training runs from May to December 2025. Through this advanced clinical training, you'll learn how to confidently and compassionately heal the impact of adverse childhood experiences, complex trauma, and CPTSD. You'll gain specialized trauma-informed training that supports the resolution of attachment, developmental, relational, cultural, and intergenerational trauma. Join us and experience the integration of the neurobiologically informed clinical approach that promotes post-traumatic growth. Become part of a community where mindfulness meets clinical expertise and embody professional and personal growth with a catalyst for transformation in your practice and community. Visit ComplexTraumaTrainingCenter.com to register for the Summer 2025 NARM Therapist Training. Enrollment is open to licensed psychotherapists, counselors, social workers, and other licensed mental health professionals, as well as graduate trainees and interns working toward licensure. And now for our interview. Dr. Samra Zafar is an award-winning international speaker, best-selling author, and resident psychiatrist. After escaping a decade of abuse as a child bride in Canada, she went on to pursue her education and became a global advocate for progress. Her speaking portfolio includes 4 TED Talks and speeches to leading corporations, nonprofits, governmental agencies, and educational institutions. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Samra Zafar. All right, I am sitting here with Dr. Samra Zafar. Welcome to Transforming Trauma.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for welcoming me and for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And I'd love to begin by asking, what would you like our listeners to come away from our conversation with today?
If there's one message that I could say I want people to come away with, it would be that our power as human beings to heal from whatever happens to us is greater than whatever happens to us. And trauma is awful. It breaks us. It hurts us and harms us in many ways. However, as human beings, this is my firm belief as a survivor, as a physician, that we have the capacity to make art from those broken pieces. That does not mean that what happened to us was okay. It means that we are more powerful than what happened to us.
I feel so moved hearing you say that. And I'm really excited to hear more.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah. So I know you've got a few books in the mix and you've got content out in the world, and I'm curious to hear more just about how you got into the field and working with trauma.
My interest and journey in this field comes from a very personal space. And I'm originally from Pakistan. I was born in Karachi, Pakistan, and I grew up in Abu Dhabi, where I went to a British private school and I was getting an education, a very good education. And I was surrounded by these mixed messages. I was told by my parents and others around me that I can get an education, I can change the world. At the same time, I was also surrounded by many messages from the same people that because I'm a girl, I shouldn't dream big and my dreams were not valid. And it's okay to dream, but don't expect them to come true. After all, my destiny is to be a wife and a mother and a daughter-in-law and serve the gender role that has been prescribed for me and women before me from eternity, for generations. And growing up, I was a bit of a rebel, so I pushed the boundaries in my own ways. So when I was told I cannot go outside and play cricket with the boys anymore, I started my own girls' cricket team in the school. And then I started my school newspaper when I was in grade 8 and started sharing all these radical ideas of gender equality at the time. And just pushing in my own way. And I never really thought that something like marriage would ever happen to me, in a forceful way. I would be able to choose who I want to get married to. I want to get an education first and be self-sufficient first. And, I was the one who would tell all my cousins and friends that you don't need a man to fulfill you as a woman. It's great to have one, but your education comes first. So I was a bit of an anomaly in the surroundings that I was growing up in. And then when I was in grade 10, actually, at the time, I was 16 years old. And my mother came into my room And as I was doing my math homework, puts a glass of orange juice on the table, strokes my hair very lovingly, and informs me that there is a marriage proposal for me that came from one of her friends. And I was really taken aback and shocked. And I said, well, what do you mean, Mom? Like, I'm 16. I want to go to school. I haven't even finished high school yet. And she said, well, Samra, look at all these big dreams that you have. You want to go to university, you want to become a doctor, you want to change the world, like all these things. You can't really do that as a girl. You can't really do that. We can't just send you away to America or the UK or Canada or somewhere to get an education. So, because the proposal, like this man who I was supposed to get married to, he lived in Canada. So this way, my mom said, you get to go to Canada, you get to go to school there, and we won't be worried about you that you are by yourself and unchaperoned. I screamed and resisted for weeks thereafter. And I had nightmares. I used to wake up in the middle of the night crying and begging my mother not to do this. But then, when everybody around you tells you that something is right for you, and that inner voice inside of you that is screaming no. But when you're a child, especially, and all the adults around you are telling you this is the right thing to do, that inner voice gets silenced very quickly. What am I? I'm just a teenager. If my parents are saying this, if my aunts and uncles are saying that this is the right thing for me, then they know what's right for me. They've seen the world. And as a child, you don't want to piss people off. You don't want to lose the approval of your parents and others. In fact, their approval is essential to our survival as children.
That's right.
So shortly after my 17th birthday, I was sitting in this big grand banquet hall decked up in red and gold beside a man I'd never met before. And he was 11 years older than me, and I was now his wife. And a few months after that, I came to this big, beautiful, and very cold country called Canada. And I was expected to fit into the shoes of being a good wife. And shortly after I became a mom, so I was 18 when I became pregnant with my first child and became a mother. So it was a very shocking change to my life. I went from being this very outspoken, confident teenager in high school to now being at home all the time, raising a baby, and in a marriage that over the years became more and more abusive. As the abuse escalated, I lost more and more of my power, my agency, my autonomy. But there was still this voice inside of me that this does not feel right. There is something that is not okay about this. What can I do? And little by little, I pushed in my own little way to, first of all, get an education. So I finished high school through distance learning while being at home because I was not allowed to go to a regular high school. I was not even allowed to go anywhere for that matter. I finished high school, then worked as a babysitter to save money secretly to go to university, and then eventually started university. And I would actually skip my class to go to counseling and get information about what my options are legally and how can I take care of my children on my own. I had 2 kids by then. It was after like 10 or 11 years of marriage that I was finally able to leave that marriage and start my new life. And it was not easy. It was very difficult. I faced a ton of rejection from my community and family at the time. But I was driven by this fierce determination to give my daughters a better life, a better future, to break that cycle for them. I had grown up seeing every woman around me being abused and controlled in the name of duty, in the name of religion, in the name of the right thing to do. And I had accepted it for so long in my own life. But now that I knew better, I wanted to do better for my daughters. And it's such a gift to hear from people when they tell me that my story has lit up a fire within them or helped them realize their own courage and their own light. And I wanted to take that impact and combine that with knowledge and training and expertise in this field of healing from trauma. And that's what led me eventually to medicine and psychiatry.
I want to just pause here and just share my gratitude for first your willingness to share so personally, a really profound experience. And then also, I'm so struck by this inner voice that you're talking about, this kind of deep knowing that something isn't right with this. And I'm going to continue following in these, maybe in the moment, small ways, but collectively, they added up to you being able to pull yourself out of that situation, that abusive relationship. And I imagine there's many listening who in their own ways are feeling that desire to make all those seemingly small decisions that are ultimately would lead them to pulling themselves out of a situation. So thank you. I just really appreciate the heart that you're bringing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for picking up on that, Emily, because you're right. I truly believe all of us have that inner voice in us. All of us do. You know, when you're in a situation and everyone tells you this is okay, this is the right thing, everyone's telling you this is the right job, this is the right relationship,
Mhm.
but something in you tells you that it just doesn't feel right. You know, it just is not me. It's not sitting right with me. There is something wrong with this. And unfortunately, we live in a world where there are so many systems around us, such as patriarchy or sexism or poverty or all these kinds of inequities and injustices that we're surrounded by, that condition us to not listen to that voice.
Mhm.
But that voice never goes away. It never actually gets silenced. It gets drowned by the noise around us, but it never truly goes away. And it comes to you in whispers, in nudges, in these moments where you're sitting with yourself thinking, how on earth did I get here? Why don't I feel joy within me if everybody tells me this is what's right?
Mm.
And I had just started my undergrad and I was given permission to take only one class as long as it did not interfere with my wifely and motherly duties at home. And one day, as I was walking on campus with all these thoughts in my head that, why doesn't this feel right? Like, if this is what's right, how can I not make peace with it? And there was a sign that I came across when I was walking on campus, and it had a bunch of questions on it. Do you feel like you're always living in fear? Do you feel like you cannot be yourself? Do you feel intimidated? Like these kinds of questions. And it was like that sign was calling out to me. And right underneath that, it was, come in, we are here to talk. And it was for the counseling center on campus. And I went in and I made an appointment. And it was the very first time that I was sitting across from somebody who was not from my family, my in-laws, my community at the time. It was the first chance I had to talk to somebody completely outside of those structures. And the floodgates opened and I started to ask her, can you please tell me what's wrong with me? What do I need to do to be a better wife? Do I need to cook better food? Do I need to keep the baby quieter? Do I need to wash the clothes better? Should I quit school? Why am I not good enough? And if this is the way it is supposed to be, because everybody tells me that this is normal, then why doesn't it feel normal?
Mm.
And that's the first time anyone ever said to me, after like 10 years, 11 years of marriage, Samra, it's not your fault. No matter what you do not deserve to be abused. There's nothing wrong with you. And that was the gateway to me learning about what was happening to me and the fact that it was not my fault. Unfortunately, it happens to so many people. There are generational cycles of
Mhm.
trauma and abuse, and ultimately gave me the knowledge and the power to be able to leave that marriage. But I think the key that I've realized during all these years is that we need to make space for that inner voice to be louder than the voices around us, because that inner voice is our most trusted ally,
Mm.
is our best friend, and is the only guiding compass that we need to be authentic and be on our true paths.
Mm. This is so important. I'm glad you're highlighting this need for space, to create space for that voice to be heard. So this landed in you. You had this knowing, and I'm curious what you did next. What supported you in your next steps?
So when I first learned about abuse, I hadn't even heard the word abuse before that meeting with the
Wow.
counselor.
Mhm.
I had been in that marriage for over a decade and my spirit was so broken. And I truly had learned to believe that there was something so inherently flawed about me that I did not deserve any kind of love or respect at all. That's how I saw myself. The only thing that I could not ever give up on was my education. There was just something about school that gave me peace and solace and helped lift me up. Education was almost like a bit of a coping mechanism for me. And I found peace in my books and I found peace in knowledge. I still do.
Mm.
So after that meeting, I started to skip class to go to counseling because my schedule was watched and monitored very much by my ex husband and his parents. I didn't want them to find out that I'm staying on campus beyond my class, or then there'll be a million questions. Where did you go? Who did you meet? Etc. My emails were monitored. So over the next year, learned about my rights as a human being, as a mother, as a woman, as a Canadian. And eventually I realized that, okay, there are options. It's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy to leave. And certainly it wasn't. I lived in poverty for the next few years when after I left my marriage. I was working 5 jobs at a time just on campus, to make ends meet. I used to sell butter chicken, homemade butter chicken to students on campus to just be able to make some money for groceries. And I got a little apartment on student housing where I lived with my 2 daughters. I did report my ex husband, and he was arrested on 4 counts of assault and eventually convicted as well. But I had to take him to court for child support and spousal support and all those things. It was a very, very difficult time indeed. But, Emily, what the hardest thing was not all those practical difficulties. The hardest thing was the intense amount of shame, the judgment, the ostracization, the marginalization that I faced from the people who I thought would love and protect and support me. My mother didn't want to tell all the extended family that I had left my marriage because it was so shameful. My sisters wanted to hide it from their friends and in-laws and families that they had a divorcee sister. My extended family, I used to hear all these messages from people in Pakistan about how I failed at the real purpose of being a woman and I should be ashamed of myself.
Mm.
Even in Canada, the people I knew as friends stopped picking up my calls, stopped answering my pleas for help. And the sexual harassment I faced from men who now thought I was fair game and damaged goods, so I should be grateful for their advances. That was what almost undid me. That shame was so much that I almost went back about 6 months after I had left. And thankfully, what helped me not go back at that time was the new community that I found. So the new friends that I made on campus, people who would buy my butter chicken and then come back for more, and then they would bring ice cream to help me drown out my sorrows in sugar. Or professors who would say kind words to me and motivate me right when I needed it, or the support staff at the University of Toronto, where I was a student, who really helped me. So those people reminded me that there is a new world out there. I can make new connections. I am worthy of respect.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that time when I almost went back, a very good friend of mine, she brought a picture of my daughters that was framed, and she literally held it up in front of my face and said, if you go back, what's going to happen to them? Do you want them to be married when they're teenagers? Do you want them to never be able to go to school? Do you want them to be in the same life that you were? And I said, no. She's like, then do not go back and push through. Get back up and keep going. And it was the biggest gift anyone had ever given me.
I got chills as you were telling that story. Again, I'm just feeling so moved by your desire to have an impact, not only on your own life, but to share that with others. So you finished your undergrad, and did you immediately know that you wanted to be a doctor? And
no, actually, at that time, being a doctor was my childhood dream.
Okay.
But at that time, when I was doing my undergrad, whenever I thought about the medicine path, it's such a long road to becoming a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And, at that time I was living in poverty, trying to just establish myself. So I wanted a degree that would get me a job. I was in survival mode,
Okay.
right? I want an undergrad that would help me get a well-paying job and help me get back on my feet and provide a roof over my head for my daughters and myself and put food on the table. So I chose to do a business degree. So I did a degree in finance and economics. Then I did a master's because I thought that would help me get an edge in the job market because it's very competitive. And, most of my peers who I was graduating with were 8 years younger than me, had internships at Deloitte and KPMG and, the banks and all that. And I didn't because I was a single mom. I had been doing my studies while taking care of my children. And so I got my first job at a bank. But during that time, when I got my first job and started getting that success and that recognition for my academics, I would sometimes get invited to just do quick interviews in local media about my awards that I won. And one day, a friend of mine, her mother used to write a blog for an online newspaper that is very well followed by the Pakistani, Canadian, and North American community. So she asked me if I was willing to share my story. And I said, absolutely not, because it's too shameful. It's too traumatic. I don't want to, all these messages you hear, don't wash your dirty laundry in public, etc. And this was a conversation I had after I had won the top student award in economics. So she was at that award ceremony with her daughter. And that's when she came up to me and asked me, and I said no. And my daughter, my older daughter, who was, I think, 12 at the time, she was standing right beside me. So when we went home, she came up to me and she's like, Mom, if every woman think it's too shameful and you shouldn't share your story, then how is this ever going to change?
Wow.
I think we should talk about it.
Wow.
And I called my friend's mom the next day and I said, okay, I'll do it. And the day that blog went online, it got published, was actually my convocation day. So I went in the morning and got my degree, which was already a very emotional moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came home and I logged into social media and it was flooded with messages from people all over the world. There's a quote that is attributed to Mark Twain. The two most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why you were born.
Mm.
Now, I don't believe we just have a one why. We have many purposes that we discover in our life along the way. But that was certainly a very much find my why kind of a day for me. I knew that I could never stop this work. I knew that I could not stop speaking up about this because how important it was. And it's the motivation that still keeps me going. And I think every day I wake up, I feel like I'm just getting started.
Mm. Listeners can't see you, but your face is just radiant. I mean, you're just glowing. It's so beautiful to imagine this life that you're describing and how beaten down it sounds like you were, and that you pulled yourself up. So you finished your undergrad, you got a master's, you were working in finance. What made you take that leap kind of back to a childhood dream? Or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what happened there?
So I was working in banking and one thing led to another. And an article that I had written got published in Toronto Life magazine, which is very well followed here in Canada. And it kind of went viral in 2017. Then I had publishers reaching out to me. Would you like to share your story in a book? And initially I was like, I have no idea, but sure, I want to talk about it. So then I got a book deal with HarperCollins. The book became a national bestseller. So I was kind of living in these two worlds, from like my day job and my profession versus, what actually ignited the fire in my soul and gave me so much meaning and purpose. Like I've stabilized myself. My daughters are in school. Like it had been about six or 7 years since I'd left my marriage. So I was in a much better place. And it was the same time that COVID happened. Mm. When the pandemic came about in 2020, I was at home most of the time, right? And just had all this time on my hands and everything, all my speaking events that I was doing got canceled because of the pandemic. So I had a lot of time to pause. Mm. And it was that time where I decided to really listen to my inner voice. Because up until then, I was asking a lot of my friends, my mentors, what should I do? And people were giving me all these different ideas, go into politics, go, become a lawyer, all these kinds of things. But I knew deep down that I am very passionate about mental health and I'm a healer at heart. So I wanted to do something in that field. And there was this nudge that kept on coming, doctor, like that whisper, right? A childhood dream. But I would just push it away and I would tell myself, it's too late. I'm in my 30s. What am I thinking? I'll be in my 40s by the time I finish my training. I have 2 children. I can't just give up everything and go back to medical school of all things. And which medical school would take a business grad anyway? So
Mm.
all these roadblocks that I had in my mind, and I would just talk myself out of it. I had a therapist at that time who, was instrumental in my healing journey. And he said to me, Samra, I think you should just take some time and be with yourself and listen to yourself. And I love road trips and I love driving. And I decided to take some time to just be with myself. So I told my children, do not call me unless it's an emergency. And an emergency is not what do I do for dinner? It's a real emergency. And I took my car and threw in a few clothes and 2 pillows and a blanket. And I just took off on a road trip for about 3 weeks. And I did not have an itinerary. I did not have a plan. I told myself I'm not going to make any bookings because I don't want to be tied to an itinerary.
Mm.
And I'm going to practice acting on my intuition. So if I am driving on the highway and there's a sign that says scenic detour and I feel a nudge inside of me, go there, take that path. I'm going to act on it. I'm not going to talk myself out of it. And it was hard in the beginning. There was a couple times when that happened. And I was like, no, I'm just, just keep going. And nope. And I would turn around and I would go down that path. And
Wow.
I would meet somebody and then they would tell me about something else that I would want to do. And, I ended up one day taking a ferry from Quebec to Labrador. For those people who are not familiar with Canadian geography, it's a different province. Just because a woman at a beach that I met, like at a secluded beach, who did not even speak English, she spoke French and I speak English. So we basically communicated through Google Translate and told me about this group of islands in this secluded place where you can only get there by boat. And she said it's really beautiful and it's very peaceful. So the next day I ended up taking a ferry to go there.
Mm.
And over those 3 or 4 weeks, it was actively repairing that broken relationship with my own intuition. And at the end of those 3 weeks, I was just driving and I was listening to an audiobook. I'm sure a lot of listeners know about this. You might too. The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And there is a sentence he says, and I'm going to paraphrase. It was something along the lines of, the most important research is me search. And when you really connect with what has unlocked your healing, that is the most powerful impetus for what the world needs to heal. So I listened to that and I just got goosebumps. It was like these electric shock waves going through me. And I had to pull over. And I just thought to myself, oh my goodness, this is what I need to do. Even as I'm telling you now, I have goosebumps.
Yeah, me too.
This is what I need to do. There's one medical school in Canada that does not require any kind of a science background. It's called McMaster University. Their motto is, bring us yourself, we'll teach you the science. So this is September 2020. Applications were due October 1st. I did not have the MCAT or anything. And I basically had 3 weeks to prep and to submit my application. Somehow I pulled together my application, my reference letters, flew to Calgary to write the MCAT after studying for 3 weeks. And I submitted my application. And a few months later, I got my interview and then got in. I graduated last year and now I'm in my residency in psychiatry at University of Toronto, just one of the best in the world. And it's unbelievable that I used to wear toy stethoscopes around my neck when I was a kid and now I get to wear a real one. Well, as a psychiatrist, there's not much use of it, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's surreal sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a ton of hard work and the long hospital shifts can certainly be draining, but the path that I'm on feels so true to what I
Mm.
do and who I am.
Mm-hmm. I'm just holding, it's like you've given us this template of like listening to your heart, making that space, allowing yourself to follow those nudges and this practice of listening to your intuition.
Mhm.
How beautiful. And that it's leading you here and you're working with clients. And I'm curious how you're utilizing what you've learned, all of this deep, rich learning personally. How are you bringing that to your patients?
It's such a beautiful feeling to be able to create a safe space for patients. And, there's boundaries to it. Obviously, I never want to make a patient encounter about me. So it's about having this knowing, this deep learning in the background while creating that safe space for a patient. If I have a patient who is talking about domestic abuse, I have certainly been there. I might say something like, I understand, and
Mhm.
say it in a way that actually resonates that, oh, yeah,
They
she
feel
does
it.
understand. The most I would say, I've been there too. It's okay to feel this way.
Mhm.
Or simply normalizing what they're feeling. Oftentimes I think, what would I like to have heard from my doctor when I was there? One time, a patient was saying to me how she has been trying to leave her marriage or her abusive relationship, and she keeps going back. And she blames herself for that. And I said something like, you're doing the best you can. And each of these times that you think you're failing, you're actually learning something that's
Mhm.
going to make you more successful later.
That's
Right.
right.
So just seeing those kinds of things and having that understanding, it helps me connect with my patients a lot better. I have heard from a lot of patients how safe they feel and how understood they feel. So that's why I feel like there's such a need for lived experience and lived expertise. And I say expertise because life teaches you a lot of times more than training does.
Mm.
Training enhances things, and it's absolutely a lot of times, as I'm training and I learn something, oh, that is what it's called. Like I learned the name of it, the
Mhm.
scientific name of this method, but I always knew it.
Yeah.
And trauma impacts not just the survivor, but also impacted my children, right? And not just me. So, something that I do with my younger daughter, she went through a bit of a rough period during the pandemic. She's 18 now, but when she was like 15, 16, 17, things were hard. Being in high school, online, not having a regular life or high school experience. And it took a toll on
Mhm.
lot of kids. So, when my daughter would feel a lot of anxiety, I would sit with her and I would hold her hands and I would just breathe with her. Okay, take a deep breath and breathe with her and talk in a calm voice so that it would calm her down. And, a few months ago, I learned that that process is called co regulation.
You were
And
doing it.
I'm like, but I've been doing it for all
I
these years,
love
you
that.
know?
Mhm.
So now I know what to call it. So it's really validating being in this profession. And then what I also get to do on the other side is bring a lot of that knowledge, in terms of science, in terms of the evidence, the research, the therapeutic modalities now into my speaking work. So my second book is filled with a lot of stories that are backed up with that science and research and that evidence, and then the tools that we can utilize in our own healing process, the tools that have helped me and things that I have seen work with patients. And hopefully, these are very accessible tools and strategies that people who are reading the book or listening to this podcast or hearing one of my talks can also utilize in their life right away. Because I am a firm believer that healing should be accessible to everybody, not just the people who can pay for
Mm.
therapists. Human healing is something that should not be reserved to people who can access it. It should be for everyone.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate your intention. Or I think what I'm hearing you say is like no gatekeeping. Like, let's open up the doors to this healing for everyone. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think if more people did that, the world would be a much better
Yes,
place.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I'm just sitting with kind of this whole journey you've taken us on. I'm thinking of, the very beginning of our conversation, and you were describing, your background and your history and kind of what was happening for you all those years ago and where you are now and the way that you're impacting the work that you're bringing, even through your speaking. So thank you. I'm just really appreciative. And I'm wondering, is there anything else that you'd like to share? Anything else that you've learned in your process and going through this trauma and coming out on the other side of it?
What I would like everybody to take away from this, if there's one thing they can, is that the courage that we seek is within ourselves. And healing requires courage. And courage is not the absence of fear. When you go into one of those wellness stores or the bookstore or something, and you see all these journals with the word fearless written across the top, be fearless. I cringe when I see those because there is no such thing as fearless. Fearlessness is a myth. And when we say to be fearless, we feel inadequate because all of us feel afraid. I have felt afraid and terrified while doing many of the things I've done in my life. I felt terrified when I left my marriage. I was terrified when I started my university. I was terrified when I quit my job and went to medical school. I'm terrified every day when I'm facing a challenge with my kids or embarking on a new medical rotation or whatever I'm doing, right? So we all feel afraid of many different things, and fear is healthy. It keeps us from doing things that are harmful for us. However, fear can also keep us from doing things that are good for us. But fear is natural. So it's not about being fearless. It's about knowing how to use fear and when to let it protect us and when to recognize that it's actually holding us back. Courage is saying, yes, I'm terrified, but I believe in this so deeply that I'm going to do it anyway. And fear can come along for the ride. So courage, the way I see it, rests on what I identify from my experience as these three pillars. One is your vision. Imagine that healed, better version of yourself. Imagine a freer version of yourself and believe in that vision. Believe in it fiercely. I will share something here. In those early years of my marriage, when I had no hope of ever going to school, it was never going to happen. I was married, I had a child, I was locked in the home all the time, I was not allowed to go out, have any autonomy. Education was out of the question. I would still stand in front of a mirror with a piece of paper rolled up in my hand, looking like a diploma, and I would practice my graduation speech at least a few times a week. And I would literally imagine that I'm standing on that stage and I'm delivering that speech as a top student. And 15 years later, I delivered that exact same speech when I graduated as the top student at the University of Toronto. So vision is believing in something before you even see it as reality. So have that vision for yourself. What is your big vision for you, for your life, for your relationships, for your career, whatever it is that means something to you, believe in it. Because if you don't believe in it, no one else is going to. The second thing is just because your vision is clear does not mean your path is going to be clear too. You will face roadblocks. You will have naysayers. You will fall. You will fail. You will scrape your knees. You will be filled with self-doubts. You will be surrounded by naysayers. You will have all kinds of things happen along the way. And the key is that you keep getting up and you keep taking that one more step, one more day, one more time. It's that grit and that perseverance. That's a choice. When I fall, am I going to stay fallen or am I going to get up and do something, whatever it is, one tiny thing, a tiny step? So oftentimes when people who have read my first book, they say that reading that book was like watching somebody trapped in a jail cell with nothing but a little teaspoon and digging a tunnel with that teaspoon. So it's those incremental steps that keep us going. And sometimes that requires a step back. And then eventually it will be a step forward. And when it comes to the doubters and naysayers, remember that when people are telling you that you cannot do something, they're showing you their limits, not yours. And the third thing is the community, the people that you surround yourself with. Be very intentional about who you're surrounding yourself with. Because no matter how much you believe in yourself, if the people around you, the community around you is not validating you, eventually that's going to take a toll. And that means listening to your intuition when you are with somebody and they make you feel great about yourself, cultivate that connection. And then draw boundaries with those who don't make you feel good about yourself. And sometimes those people are the people that people say you should be in touch with. I have had to draw a boundary with my own mother because no matter what, I will be a failure in her eyes. And, because of her religious beliefs, which are not beliefs that I follow. So it has been painful, but also necessary to draw that boundary because those toxic relationships can take away from your health, from your perseverance, from your courage, from the meaning you find in your other relationships. And that community is essential to our well-being and to our survival and also for thriving. So ultimately, to sum it up, what I would say is that courage is a practice. It's a muscle that you can build over time. And that is where your power lies. So what happened to you may have been awful, but your power to heal from that and heal with that, like I always say, you don't move on from trauma, you move on with it. Power to heal with it and to make art from those broken pieces, that power is infinite. And it is already within you. You just have to find it, access it, and cultivate it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, this is the epitome of transforming trauma. That's why I was so excited to talk to you and have this conversation and to just hear a little bit more deeply. So, your first book is A Good Wife, Escaping the Life I Never Chose.
Mhm.
And your next book, tell us.
So the next book is a very deeply personal book as well, because when I was thinking about what should my next book be, I didn't want it to be a pure memoir, but I wanted it to be rooted in lived experience and lived stories, because those stories are what connect us and make it accessible for a lot of us. So the next book is called Unconditional: Break Through Past Limits to Transform Your Future. So it is very much about transforming trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I was so excited when, I was told I get to have a chance to be on this podcast,
Yes.
because I was like, this is exactly what I'm doing. So it's really about the limits that are placed on us by society, by culture, religion, patriarchy, trauma, all kinds of things that happen to us, breaking through those and transforming our lives and our present and our future, because we have that power. And it's about unconditioning ourselves to live unconditionally.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to get this book and to delve a little bit deeper into your work even. Samra, thank you so much for joining us. These themes that you've been talking about, a theme of like building capacity. I mean, that sounds like it's your whole story. You were building capacity to really trust and follow that inner voice. And I know our community will really appreciate hearing that message as well.
Thank you so much for having me, Emily. And this has been such a beautiful conversation. This is what I live and breathe and believe in every single day. So it really feels like our hearts are here. And I'm so honored and so grateful to you for inviting me in this space.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more information about our guest, check the show notes or visit us at complextraumatrainingcenter.com/transforming trauma. You can also connect with us in other ways. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. As a mental health professional, your commitment to healing and growth inspires us. We at the Complex Trauma Training Center are committed to supporting you in your well-being and success. That's why we're honored to invite you to our Space Program 2025, an inner development program of support and self-discovery for therapists on the personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal levels. Running over 6 online sessions in 2025, this interactive experiential learning program is designed to support self-care and self-discovery for therapists, exploring internally, relationally, and transpersonally. CTTC faculty will welcome you into a professional community of therapists that are seeking to create greater effectiveness and resilience in our professional lives. As CTTC faculty Brad Kammer says, the intent is that this program will help us not only become more effective therapists, but also love our work more. Please visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com and secure your spot in the 2025 Space Program. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Elisa Sponseller for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.